Welcome into another Inside Carolina live roundtable 2024 season prediction show. Johnny T-shirt and Congruity. Buck, I always have to start with you, but I'm starting with you on a different, not because you're the boss man and the president. I'm starting with you because you're the reigning champion of this thing we call season predictions. How do you feel about learning that you're the reigning champion? How'd you feel today when you got that news?
Well, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't one of you guys. I was, hoping it would be somebody other than me this year, but is what it is.
Spoken like a true papa. Parents are the only people that want their children to be better than they were. Buck playing that role. We've got Greg Barnes, Buck Sanders, producer John in the bottom left, at least on my screen, making this all work. Jason Staples, and of course Taylor Vippolis. Taylor, just before we get rolling here, I asked you earlier about the national buzz for this North Carolina team here in 2024, and you said there's not a ton of it. What do you think about that? Listen to you and Jeff Schottmer's show earlier. What do you think about the buzz? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Before we get into this.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a two-sided coin. One side, it's this North Carolina team is essentially flying under the radar. Not a lot of teams are going to be circling them on their schedule as compared to last year when you're going up against a Drake May, a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, and you know that there's going to be a lot of eyeballs and scouts watching that game in particular. But I also think the negative part of that is that not too many people are talking about you for a pretty good reason, and you're not really in that contention conversation, and you kind of have to earn it. And I think that's where this team and this staff is kind of right now, where if you want people to talk about you, go out there and show that people should be talking about you and show that the fan base should be excited and have something to care about this season.
Jason, in 2 minutes, tell me why people should be interested in this team this year based on what we've seen so far in training camp.
I just think it's going to be so different than anything that Carolina fans have seen in a long time in terms of the kind of team this is. I think this is going to be an easy team to root for one, in terms of the way that they're going to play. And I think just watching Jeff Collins and that defense is gonna be interesting enough. And then just seeing what's going to happen at the quarterback position. Again, there's a lot of things to be interested in. And you've obviously got one of the best running backs in the country out there. I think one of the better backup running backs in the country, and still have some firepower enough to cause problems even for some better teams. So I think this is going to be one of those seasons where there's going to be a lot of games that are going to be close too. I mean, you look at the schedule, we're going to go through it. There's a bunch of games in here that are, on my percentages. I love to go percentages. They're within, it's like a 65-35 type game. There's a bunch of games that are kind of within that margin of error that, if you win more of the coin flips, then you have a great season. If you win, if you drop a couple of them because of a bad break or two, then that's gonna make the season look worse. But I think there's a good enough team to make some noise, and with a few bounces, could end up surprising some folks.
Greg Barnes, I'll let you get the final preview word in. You've been doing this a long time, and shout out to the person on the message board that has been keeping track of this stuff since 2020. I guess if I had to be talked about, being called optimistic is not a bad thing on there. But Greg, your take here as we're 10 days out or so going into the season.
Yeah, so two points I want to make. One, I want to support Jason here. That's what we do as a brotherly setup. And when Jason starts talking about percentages, I feel like we need to lay this out every year, because there's always some confusion about it. And part of it is as we go through these games, you're going to hear that North Carolina is favored in pretty much all of them. There's probably going to be, at least according to projections, Carolina probably won't be favored, of course, in Tallahassee, and then probably against NC State. That's going to be about it. Now, does that mean Carolina goes 10-2? No, it does not. And so just kind of the easy frame of reference is if North Carolina is favored by a touchdown in every single game, in all 12 regular season games, their projected record would be about 8-4. And the reason why is because winning percentage is a lot different than point spread. And so if you're favored by a touchdown, you're going to win about 70% of the time. That means that you're going to lose 3 out of every 10, just looking back over the last 20-plus years of how this stuff plays out. The bookies are pretty good.
Why is that? Why is that, Greg? I mean, you're supposed to win that game.
Correct. And what we have found over time is that in these games in which you're talking about a coin flip, right? Something inside of a touchdown, you're not going to be in a situation where you're just so good as a coach or so good as a player that you're going to consistently win more than half of those. You may do it in a year or even 2 years, but over the long haul, you're going to split those games. That's just how it works.
And the reason is if you're within a touchdown, one turnover,
right,
one missed block, one safety falls down, when he's coming up to make a tackle or misplays a ball on a deep ball, one play separates two teams in a one touchdown game. So if it's a 6-point spread, what that means is these two teams ultimately come down to being separated by one play that somebody makes and somebody else doesn't. When you're coming down to margins of one play, well, you're not going to be the one to make that play every week, right? That's what that comes down to. And I think that's a way to kind of make sense of it for fans. Is it one play? Like, are you more than one play better? If you're 28 points better than that other team, you're at minimum 4 plays better than that other team. And so if you screw up on 2 of those 4, you're still winning in terms of those game deciding plays. I mean, Mac Brown likes to say every game's decided by 5 plays. He's not wrong.
It's a game of inches for sure.
Yeah. And so Tommy, the other part of it, I agree that this has potential to be an exciting year. I think when you have a situation where you don't have a Sam Howell or a Drake May to get all the attention and to set expectations so high, you really have to play well as a team. And I think, we're this far into the Mac Brown era, right? I mean, he's been here a long time now. I think he's done a pretty good job in terms of depth on both sides of the ball. The one point I want to make, and some people may be wondering, like, okay, we've heard some criticism about the team, but yet you're going to hear some pretty lofty records tonight. And there's a reason for that. We talk about Brian Fremeau all the time, right, in terms of FEI and scoring advantage per possession, which is all great. That's my favorite dude with that stuff. He also does a really unique way of looking at strength of schedule. He actually does three categories. One is kind of your average strength of schedule, which is what an average team, so maybe like team number 60 nationwide, how that team would fare against a particular schedule. He also does something that's 2 standard deviations above that. So essentially you're talking about an elite team. I see it, Buck. So let's say top 25, right? And what he measures is how difficult is your schedule for a team that's like top 25 in the country. Well, if you date back to 2019, Carolina has not played a schedule that ranks inside the top 60 since 2019. They have not played a difficult schedule since Mac's been back. Last year was 90th. This year, the projection is 94th, which is the second easiest schedule in Power 5, according to Fremeau's rankings, preseason rankings. So the opportunity is there for North Carolina to win a lot of games, and the opportunity is there for North Carolina to reach double digits, even without having a fantastic team. And I think that's important to understand as we start these conversations.
That's why this shirt is relevant. Guys like Greg Barnes, I see everything. 94th projection rank. Whew, I might have to adjust my predictions here. A couple things. I'm going to let John.
You can only go so high, Tommy.
It's 15, 16. Is that too high? John B's going to explain everything, show the past winner, give Buck his flowers, and Greg and Jason. But one thing we do in these season predictions, they're all health determinative or health matters here. So if we predict something here on August 19th and there's bad injury news across the country on one of the teams Carolina plays, it kind of is what it is. But we can't do a prediction show waiting and basing it on that. So I'm going, if all health issues are good for Carolina, that's how I'm basing mine. John B., get in here and explain everything, and let's get this rolling.
First, I want to give a shout out to the live chat. We've got 244 people in here. Let us know where you're watching from in the live chat, and also make sure you're participating in the show by submitting your picks to the Google form. Throughout the show, I'll be revealing how the Inside Carolina community has voted in each of these games and how your predictions stack up compared to the panel of experts here. But before we talk about the 2024 season, we're going to take a look back at the last 3 years of picks here, because we've been doing this together for a while now. I threw out 2020 because that was a weird year with COVID and the schedule change and things like that. So we're looking at the last 3 years of data here. The easiest way to look at this is by looking at the record there. So Tommy in 2021 predicted that UNC would go 12-0. They instead went 6-6. So Tommy was 6 off. That's kind of the easiest way to understand this. So you can see everyone's picks here over the last few years. As we talked about, Buck was the champion last season. He had the most correct picks. He picked UNC to go 9-3, which is one higher than their ultimate record, but he nailed the individual game picks. So Buck takes home the crown from last season. I had UNC at 8-4, but I was all over the map. I basically picked every single game wrong. So you can look at the historical record here and see who has historically been pessimistic and who has historically been optimistic as we head into 2024. And let's turn it over to the board. We'll take a look at this schedule here. We have the 6 columns for each of us, and then the IC community in the 7th column. We'll also take a look at some other picks that the IC staff has made potentially later in the show. Tommy, do you want to lead us off here and let us make these picks together?
Yeah, let's get rolling. First of all, I got to give a shout out. Somebody said M City. I know where M City is. I got peoples in that area. And also, Jim, if you're really in Trinidad watching this, we need to talk. If you can watch it from there, I can do the show from there. So we can make arrangements. Buck Sanders, you are first on the list, first in our hearts. You get the first pick. Carolina at Minnesota, September 29th on a Thursday night in the big city of Minneapolis. Primetime game, State Fair going on. I'll be in town. Inside Carolina will be all over it. Buck, get us rolling here, and let's go down the list.
It's not going to be a surprise that I'm going to pick Minnesota, I don't think. I know some of you guys may not pick UNC to beat Minnesota, but I am. So, you know, it's going to be a very, analytically, it's a very tight game. 54.7% probability of win, and the S&P Plus, the most recent edition of that has the Tar Heels favored by 1/10 of a point. But the way this game turns out, I think, is going to determine who is going to be the champion next year. If you get this game right, then a lot of the rest of it is going to fall into place for you.
So you have them losing to Minnesota. Just make sure.
No. We beat Minnesota.
Carolina beats. Yeah, a little confusing there.
Yeah,
Buck has
sorry.
Carolina in the win column. Jason, you're up.
This is maybe the most coin flippy of all the games on the schedule. I have this right at 0.55 in terms of Carolina winning, which incidentally is right on what both the SP Plus and FPI have it on as well. So the question really is whether I think this is an 8-4 Carolina team or a 9-3 Carolina team, because I think this game probably determines whether they're closer to a 7-win team or a 9-win team. And ultimately that's a really hard one. I've gone back and forth on this. I'm seeing the chat here. Yeah, I'm just not persuaded. I watched last year's game, and I'm still not persuaded that Minnesota is going to be real strong on offense. So I'm going to go with a win here, and that will correlate with my 0.55. But yeah, I'm going to go with a win.
Taylor, you're getting a lot of shout-outs for you and Shots. First episode a couple days ago. Great show there. What do you think about this trip to Minnesota?
Yeah, I hate to use the must-win term this early in the season, but as an ode to Tommy Ashley,
I just got a check. I just got a Venmo, $10. Somebody used my coined phrase.
This feels as close to a must-win for the vibes of the overall season as you could get. Minnesota with an FCS quarterback coming up and making the change to Power 5 football or Power 4 football, I guess. I think this is a game where North Carolina's defensive line has to win it for them, and stopping Minnesota's ground game and making Brosmer make enough plays with his arm. I think North Carolina starts the year off strong and gets a win. I don't think their problem necessarily outside of that, like Virginia Tech game, I guess, whatever year that was, their problem really isn't starting season strong. It's more about finishing and collapsing late. So I have Carolina winning.
Yeah, they were 3-1 against Power 5 teams in the Mac Brown era, Vip. So you're right on point there. Only one loss to a Power 5 team.
According to, and I don't believe this, according to Evan Rogers, Inside Carolina's premier intern, UNC hasn't won a road season opener since '93. Is that accurate? And that was USC.
Probably so, but they don't play too many games.
I haven't played very many of them
on the road. Normally, it's particularly Power 5 teams.
Yeah.
Now they played South Carolina several times in Charlotte, which we can talk about whether that's a real neutral field or not. But yeah, that's they don't play many games on the road.
Granted, I remember that Southern Cal game. That was my senior year plus a quarter or plus a semester, and Carolina beat the brakes off them with Marcus Wall running over the safety not named Jason Sehorn. Greg Barnes, you're up.
So I like the optimism thus far, but I will say that I agree that the returns on the defense have been positive. I'm going to have to see it. And I agree that some of the returns on what Carolina has at quarterback has been reassuring. I'm going to have to see it. This is a road game. It's going to be at night. It's going to be exciting up there. They have a good fan base. Minnesota's returns 4 starters on the offensive line. They got a really good running back in Taylor. PJ Fleck thinks this is his best front 7 that he's had. Corey Heatherman did a bang-up job at James Madison. I know they lose Rossi as DC, but I think that the kid has a lot of potential. He's a good mind. Can Carolina win this game? Of course they can. This is one of those 50-50 games, but I'm going to have to see it. So I've got Minnesota taking this one.
But you don't have to see Greg? Minnesota.
Uh-oh, shots fired. Get him, Buck.
You don't have to see Minnesota to believe in them.
I don't believe in Minnesota.
You just take them at face value.
So Minnesota has upgraded at quarterback, which is not saying. I mean, the Greek rifle sucked, right?
Well,
Is anybody suggesting
do we
that
know?
Carolina
Do
has
we
upgraded?
know? Do we know that's really an upgrade?
I
I
think.
mean,
so.
it was an FCS quarterback.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's an upgrade. Do we know? Don't we have to see it first?
Possibly.
The home field matters too.
It does.
And what's your percentage on this one, Greg?
0.51.
I'm
So
just
0.51
here.
in 0.51 in Minnesota's favor.
Yes.
So that's 0.49 then. All right.
Okay. 0.49. Yes.
I am just here for the saucy Buck Sanders. Love it. Carolina's winning. Carolina's winning because I'm going. And
You have overshot the win totals by 10 games in 3 years, Tommy. 10 games.
That's a good season. 10 wins.
I know it's pretty good around here, Greg.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, I'd rather overshoot than come up short. I wish I played golf like that, but I do most of my other stuff. And Buck, our other producer said your audio is extremely loud, whatever that means. We'll get it fixed on the audio version. But like I said, I love Saucy Buck. Producer John, save us. And just for the record, we're going to have to speed this up, or we're going to be here till midnight. Somebody on the boards called me out, said my bedtime's 9:45. So we'll speed it up when we get past this. John, what's up?
Well, I was going to make my pick. I'm a little afraid now after Buck's comments earlier. So I'm going to stay strong here. I think for me, this is a loss for two reasons. Number one, breaking in a new quarterback on the road. We do not know what UNC's quarterback room looks like. Last season against Minnesota, Drake May was superhuman. Some of the throws that he was making, he was fitting those balls into such a tight window. I think they're going to miss Drake May's arm talent in this game. And then also breaking in a new defensive coordinator. Are we sure all the communication issues are gone by game one of the season? That I'm not sure about. So I'm going with a loss. The Inside Carolina community, disagrees with me. People felt pretty confident about this one. 63% of respondents predicted that UNC would beat Minnesota.
And I think the Inside Carolina staff is somewhat split. I see right many of them picking Minnesota in that. So let's do this. We're split really here on Minnesota. Charlotte, Carolina returns
Win.
home. Let's all say a win. Raise your hand.
Yep. Win 0.95.
Even though they're they're decent on college football.
You could take NCCU off as well while you're at it.
So we're going win across the board. What about so Central's a win across the board? Everybody agrees with that.
Yep.
No
Win
disrespect to those
1.0.
schools.
Yeah, Charlotte's projected by Fremo to be number 124 out of 134 in the FBS. They're not good.
If we are discussing either one of these games in the loss column on the day after, I feel like there will be some major issues in Chapel Hill. Which brings us, and we're on the Inside Carolina Annual Season Prediction Show. Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity are our sponsors. Brings us to JMU. I'm going to go ahead and get my pick in here. Carolina's going to beat JMU. They lost a coach. They got major turmoil. This game's not going to be close either. So I'll get in there. Let's go back to front. Greg, you're up.
Yeah, you talk about a team that you have to actually see, right? At least Carolina and Minnesota have people coming back. JMU's got new coaching staff. They lost a truckload of players, and they have replaced them. And apparently, some people in Virginia think maybe they could be good, but that's certainly not a game that I'm gonna pick an upset in. So I got Carolina winning this one.
Taylor.
Carolina beating JMU. I think this when you're looking at the schedule as a whole, the Charlotte, NC Central, JMU, those have to be as close to must wins or not must wins, but 100% wins as possible.
Jason, we feel the same.
Yeah, it's this is a win. I've got this as 0.8.
All right, Buck Sanders.
I think this is going to be a closer game than I think the consensus is so far. But in any event, I'm going to call it a win. But just because Everett Withers used to coach there, be the head coach, that's a Carolina connection there. And Lyle Hempel is the DC, is a defensive coordinator. He was at Duke last year. So connections there.
Sitting on G, waiting on O.
Producer John.
The IC community was pretty confident in this one as well, just like the rest of us. 96% of the community predicted a win. I will as well. So I have UNC at 3-1. The majority of the panel, though, has UNC at 4-0, heading into their first road game of the season. First conference game of the season at Duke. Tommy, where do we want to start here?
We can start with Buck here at Duke. Buck, this game 2 years ago was pretty amazing. Great atmosphere in Wallace Wade. I don't care what anybody says. I love watching a football game over there. That atmosphere was nice in Wallace Wade. Drake May makes the throw to Antoine Green to win that game. And then last year, Carolina ekes out one against Duke as well. But what you got, Duke at or Carolina at Duke?
I'm going to be a lot like Tommy Ashley. I'm putting in another win now. But it is one of the tightest games on the schedule where North Carolina is actually favored to win. It's about as close as the Minnesota game. And it's going to be a road game, I'm guessing at night. Could either go either way, but North Carolina is favored by the metric, so I'm going with them.
All right, Jason.
I've got Duke here, but to channel Lee Corso, closer than the experts think. I think this is a very, very. Or I've got Carolina. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. But I've got Carolina. I've got Carolina here over Duke, but the percentage at 0.55. I think this is a game that's probably within a one touchdown type spread. I think this is going to be real close. The reason I favor Carolina here, and the reason this is another one I was on the fence about. I think this game ultimately comes down to the line of scrimmage, and Duke lost an awful lot up front on both sides of the ball. I think they've got some advantages in the skill positions, but I think this is one game where Carolina is able to run the ball and stop the run well enough to win this game. 0.55.
Taylor.
Yeah, Duke loses their three best players along the defensive line. I do think this game is going to be a lot tougher than the average Carolina fan would think, but losing that talent on the defensive line, I have this stat from collegefootballnews.com. Last year, Duke was 7-0 when it held teams under 4 yards per carry, 1-5 when it allowed more. I think this is a game where Carolina leans heavily on that run game until Duke can kind of prove that their defensive front is as strong as it was last year.
I think the head coaching change is going to make a difference too, a big difference. I think there's a lot of gap between Mike Elko and Manny Diaz.
All right. Before Greg, you get in, I mean, if you're going to come on our chat and post political stuff, I mean, what are we doing, folks? There's another one, John. Grab him. Greg, your choice, Carolina at Duke.
Yeah, I've got Carolina here. Like Taylor said, I mean, Duke's lost some key parts, especially up front. Lost their best running back to NC State. Lost quarterback to Notre Dame. And then I agree with Buck that Mike Elko is just a phenomenal coach. I think he's going to do great things at A&M. And I'm not as big of I'm not as down on the new head coach as a lot of other people are. I mean, I think before he got screwed out of a job at Miami, that team was not that bad. They just had a couple close losses. Even so, I just don't think Duke has enough, and I think this is a game that North Carolina wins.
I'll be honest on this one. I think Carolina wins. I'm going to go with win, but I agree. It's going to be another one of those ridiculously close games. Something about Duke, Carolina, and I can go back to Mike Thomas and Octavius Barnes having to complete a pass. I can go back to Carolina taking a safety in that game. I can go back to Duke missing easy field goals that would have beaten Carolina. I think Duke missed 3 in Kenan Stadium one year when they were terrible and Carolina was decent. So I'm going win, but close. John?
Tommy, when's the last time that Carolina played at Duke during the day? Has it been a while?
There was one, I think it was the COVID year. It was like an afternoon game.
Okay.
UNC won big that year. Javante went crazy.
Yeah, the non-COVID, I'm thinking I went over there during the day. I know they lost on Thursday night or at night when they wore the black face mask, Gio made that long run, fumbled, recovered the fumble. They lost that game. They lost the Trubisky game. It might be the same game.
It was 16. That was after Gio.
Okay, so that was 16.
I think
This
they
is
lost
like-
18 in a day game.
18.
I remember one of the games, Daniel Jones kind of.
Yeah,
ran all over them.
that's when they got Daniel Jones a top 10 draft pick on that one game. Didn't he have 520 some yards total offense? I mean, Daniel Jones. I mean, granted he's not terrible, but geez, it made him a mint. He should send part of his check to that defense. John, you got Carolina win or loss?
I've got UNC winning this game. I agree with Scott Dawson. The transfer portal really devastated Duke's roster. When you listen to the Virginia Tech people talk, they love Anias Peebles, that defensive tackle that transferred away from Duke. Riley Leonard, of course, at Notre Dame. You go on from there.
Jordan Waters, the running back, went to state, didn't he?
Exactly, yep. So this is a win for me. And the IC community agrees. They're pretty confident in this one. IC community has UNC at 5-0 heading into the home game against Pitt. Should we start with Buck again for this one?
We can, but let me do Johnny T-shirt first. Johnny T-shirt, JohnnyT-shirt.com. Jason's favorite sponsorship of the Inside Carolina community. Go check them out on Franklin Street. All the students are back in town. Franklin Street is absolutely rocking. Johnny T-shirt right in the middle of it there on East Franklin. Go see them. They got great customer service, great friends. Tell them Inside Carolina sent you. Tell them you're a premium subscriber and get 10% off that order. And also the other sponsor, Congruity, congruityhr.com. Email Matt at congruityhr.com for your free assessment. See what they can do to help you out. They've got great customer service as well. They've got great technology. They've got great methods to make your business like theirs, a nationally known business that is locally based. That's what they do. Johnny T-shirt and Congruity take care of them. They take care of us. National Guys Pay the Bills audio version. It's the prediction show. All right, Buck, you can start us off. We're back. Inside Carolina's annual season prediction show. Pittsburgh comes to Kenan Stadium. Seems like we're right in the middle of sort of the quote-unquote second third of the season for North Carolina. I think the at Duke, Pitt, Georgia Tech, at Virginia games are the ones that are really flippy and toss-uppy, as Jason said. But who you got, Pitt?
I've got North Carolina to beat Pitt. I'm sad that I'm going first here because I enjoyed my rant so much last year when everybody picked Pitt, and I had everybody picked Pitt, and I was going to pick them too, but y'all convinced me otherwise.
You misspelled.
Anyway.
You misspelled. Pissed you off and made you go Carolina. Am I right?
Yes, they did. So
Duke's got, Buck's got Pitt. What you got, Jason?
I'm going to go with Carolina here. I feel about Pitt's offense the way that Greg does about Carolina's defense right now. They have a whole lot to prove to me in terms of their ability to run a competent offense up there. I'm going to go with Pitt percentage at 0.65.
Taylor Vippolis.
Yeah, with as many toss-up games Carolina has, you're going to have to find losses somewhere. But looking at what Pitt returns this year, it's hard to pick this as one of the games that Carolina can drop. I have Carolina winning.
Greg Barnes. Greg Barnes loves some Narduzzi. Loved some Narduzzi. What's up?
I do. It pains me that Pitt has fallen on such difficult times. Yeah, I agree with Taylor, and kind of the talk in Pittsburgh is that now they finally got an offense where they return a lot of players and they're going to be better. They lost a ton off of defense, and they were already starting to struggle dramatically last year defensively. And Narduzzi's a defensive coach. So if you don't field a good defense and you're a defensive coach, that doesn't bode well. We've seen that around North Carolina before. So I've got Carolina winning this one.
These are games, and we talked about Duke losing stuff in the portal. We talked about James Madison losing stuff in the portal. These are the type teams that the free agency of the portal kills, I think, and the way things work. And I have no idea whether Pitt's lost anything off out of the portal or not, but they lose a ton. Buck, you point out that they've got a couple returning starters on defense. I'm going to continue the trend. I do agree with what Taylor said. At some point, got to find some losses, but this is not one of them. What you got, John?
First, I'll go with the IC community pick. Inside Carolina, very confident in this one as well. 86% of respondents have UNC winning this game. So you can see not only does IC have UNC at 6-0, but it's a pretty confident 6-0 for the community here thus far. That changes as we start to get into the second half a little bit.
It's actually 5.34. So they're expecting based on those percentages, we'd expect Carolina to be 5-1 at this point.
Okay,
I don't do math, so I trust what both you say.
That is true. There is a little bit of maybe the Minnesota game is the least confident of the group, but I think the raw numbers. I think 5 people picked James Madison, so a lot of people are picking the Tar Heels to win early in the season. I'm also going to go with a win here. I just don't think Pitt has enough this game at home as well for the Tar Heels. As referenced in the chat, they've played well against Pitt at home. That takes us to Georgia Tech, which is entering an interesting part of the schedule, especially when you look at the historical last few years for Georgia Tech and Virginia for the Tar Heels.
I'm trying to think who I want to go first. I'm going to give it to Taylor first on Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech and Carolina in Kenan Stadium. This is a low-key underrated series here. And Georgia Tech, we've talked about the issues in Atlanta, but Georgia Tech is beating Carolina in Chapel Hill too. What you got, Taylor?
Yeah, Max Johnson is still starting. This is the Aggie Bowl with 2 former Texas A&M quarterbacks starting. And last year and the years prior, my default in a lot of these toss-up games was picking Carolina because I thought Carolina had the quarterback advantage. So by that same logic, I'm picking Georgia Tech because I like Haynes King as a quarterback a lot more than I like Max Johnson or Connor Harrell or whoever comes out of that Carolina room. I just think Georgia Tech knows what they have in Haynes King a lot more than Carolina knows what they have in their quarterbacks.
Indeed. Jason, you're up.
I've got this as a loss. I actually, percentage-wise, have Carolina favored 0.6, but I've got to find losses to predict, and this is one of the most likely on the board. And I think, like Vip just said, they're a team that I think they kind of know who they are coming into this year. And you know, if you look at them, they're pretty healthy on the offensive line. They've got some players there, and they've got an awful lot of speed on that offense, from Haynes King being a dual threat guy to, you know, we saw all that speed last year against Carolina's defense, and they, you know, kind of turned into a defensive apocalypse in the second half. And this is one of those games where I think if I'm looking for losses, and I think you need to with this Carolina team, given how many toss-ups there are, this is one of the ones that I would think would be the most likely loss.
Buck Sanders, who you got?
This is a tough one, no question about it. Earlier, before the chat even got started, Tar Heel Paul in the comments said that North Carolina loses games where they're favored by 10 plus 20% of the time. When Greg was going through his explanation, long-winded explanation about percentages and whatnot. So, you got to find some losses somewhere, and this would be a good place to pick one. North Carolina should win this game. I mean, we can talk about Haynes King and this, that, and that, and the other, but all the metrics say North Carolina wins the game. That's just does. It's 65.3% probability on the ESPN, and they're favored by 10 points, 10.3 at this moment. It'll change if, during the season. So I'm going to, the way you win this game we're playing now is you got to pick against the grain somewhere. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take UNC to beat Georgia Tech. See how that turns out for us.
Buck Sanders is trending towards my territory. I'm going to go ahead and pick it, and Greg, you can take it last. I had the Duke game and Georgia Tech. One of those was a loss. Obviously, I picked Duke as a win for North Carolina. I'm going to pick this as a loss because, like Greg said in the opening, he wanted to see the defense. I want to see that they can beat a team with a really good offense. And I don't think they've seen that until this point in the season. This will be 7 games in, 6 games played, 7th game of the year. I'm going to go with Georgia Tech and Haynes King. That could change if we did this show week to week. But, yeah, I'm going Georgia Tech. Greg, what you got?
I'm going Georgia Tech as well. And part of it is what's already been said about the Georgia Tech offense should be good, and not just Haynes King, but Jamal Haynes is back. Rutherford's back. Eric Singleton, very speedy. He's back. And then a lot of offensive linemen. I think that group could be very explosive. Phil Steele highlighted, which I thought was interesting. I made a note of this. Brent Key is 4-0 straight up against ranked ACC opponents. It may just be noise, but it may also show that, hey, this guy has potential to become a pretty solid coach down the road. And so I think this is going to be probably the best opponent that Carolina has played up to this point. So there's benefits of having a weak schedule that you get to stack wins. But I think when you get this time of year, when people start to get tired, and you play an explosive offense, I think you're going to get smacked in the face a little bit. And I think that's going to happen for the Tar Heels, unfortunately.
John B., what you got?
I'll start with the IC community. A little bit more divided on this one, kind of echoing what you guys called out. Jason, they were very close to the percentage you had. 58% selected UNC to win, slightly higher than what we've seen so far in terms of people picking losses. However, I just can't see this North Carolina team losing to Georgia Tech again. I have this one down as a win for many of the same reasons that I talked about at the top with the loss at Minnesota. I think UNC finds some clarity at quarterback by this point in the season, and I could see the defense starting to click by mid-season as well. So I have this one as a win for the Tar Heels. That takes us.
Hold on. Let me throw this comment up. Scott Dawson, you asked for it. I feel like I walked in on my sister. All of you are picking Georgia Tech at home.
Whiskey Tango Foxtrot.
Yeah.
Not all.
Yeah. Don't forget the one on the far left over there. We got bookend wins. I think until Carolina shows that they can beat Georgia Tech, first of all, and then deal with that offense, I think it's Georgia Tech until proven otherwise. John, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'll get to the Virginia game. Greg, I'll let you go first on Virginia.
Coward.
Have you gone first yet, Jason?
No.
Okay.
I'm in the 2 column.
Virginia's an interesting thing. I think there was a thread on the message boards. They're struggling selling tickets. But Virginia, we all know that once upon a time history up there. Greg, where are you seeing this one?
Yeah, I think Tony Elliott's getting Virginia to be a little bit better. Not drastically better, and probably not better enough. So I think with this being up there, knowing the rivalry between these two programs, I think this is going to be a tough game for North Carolina. I just don't know that Virginia really has enough unless they have another game like last year where everything fell their way. And so because of that, I've got North Carolina winning, although I do think it'll be a competitive game.
Jason Staples, Virginia hosts North Carolina.
This is a really close one. I've gone back and forth on this one. I think Virginia is going to be a good bit better than last year. Think about it. Last year, Virginia started on the offensive line 2 freshmen and 2 sophomores. They're going to be better this year. And they also discovered a quarterback in Calandria, who he kind of discovered himself against Carolina, if you remember. And they're going to have, I think a decent passing game this year overall. I mean, you got Chris Tyree from Notre Dame. You've got actually Andre Green from the transfer from Carolina. You've got Malachi Fields returning. You've got some pieces in the passing game for them to be really good, and I think it's going to be a competitive game there. And defensively, I think they've got some tools there. I just think this is a bad matchup for them because I think to beat this North Carolina team, you're probably not best off to be a pass first team that is going to struggle to run the football, and because I think Carolina's strength is going to be in their secondary and in their pass rush. So I think Carolina's going to get it done on the road. And the other thing is that this is a game coming off of a bye. So I think Carolina comes in with a little bit of rest here and takes care of business. But this is a 0.6 for me. This is really on the margins. I've gone back and forth here quite a bit. And I would not be surprised to see this go the other way. This is one of the most dangerous games on the schedule because I think Virginia's going to be a better team this year than they were last year.
And there's discussion in the chat about Musket starting. I thought Musket started last year, and he was not good.
I don't think Elliott's named as starting quarterback yet.
Yeah,
He hasn't, and I would be shocked if it's Musket instead of Calandria.
And then Calandria looked pretty good in Kenan Stadium. Taylor, what you got?
Yeah, this and the Georgia Tech game are the 2 games where I don't understand where like a lot of people's confidence is coming from, knowing the Carolina teams that we've kind of seen in the past, where people are like, this is an easy game or this should be an easy win. When this team has kind of proven over the years that they really don't have any easy Power 5 wins on the schedule that you can mark at the beginning of the season, knowing how they play. The UVA game was left a really bad taste in a lot of people's mouth last year. I just re-looked at that box score, and Omar and Hampton had 5 second half carries in a 1-score game in the entire second half. But I think this is a game Carolina wins. I don't have too much reasoning besides the fact that I think Carolina still is the better team and they've recruited better. And this is just a game where it feels like they have to win.
I think Carolina wins at Virginia. I think it's a bounce-back game. It's another show-me game. I think they win. Buck, I saved you for last. You got everybody's opinion, even though I gave you nothing.
Well, I think this is the one that where North Carolina spits the bit, which they are accustomed to do. And it's you got to pick one of these games. You know they should beat Georgia Tech. They should beat Virginia, but you got to know they're not going to win both those games. I mean, it's just something about this Mac Brown 2.0 that he's going to have to spit the bit at some point. And this is at Virginia, night game, Halloween time frame. It's just made for a North Carolina loss, so this is where I'm going with an L.
Buck Sanders breaks the winning streak with a spit the bit game. I feel you. John, what you got?
I have UNC going 2-0 in these games. I'm picking UNC to beat Virginia. I just feel like when you look at the depth charts of these two teams, I just feel like UNC is in a better spot from a personnel perspective than this Virginia ball club when you look at who they have and the talent, the high-end talent that North Carolina has compared to Virginia's roster. So I'm going with roster strength. And, Taylor, you were talking about last year's game. Maybe a little bit of faith by me as well that North Carolina has figured out its punting situation by middle of this upcoming season, because that poor punt in the second half of last year's game played such a big part in how that game ended up. The Inside Carolina community agrees with me. They have this one pretty confidently as a UNC win. 73% of respondents picked UNC to beat the Cavaliers. That takes us to a road game against Jason's team, the Florida State Seminoles. Some interesting history down in Tallahassee for the Tar Heel football program. Who wants to start with this one?
Jason, you can get in here. You seem to know a little bit about Florida State.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to be pretty plain on this. I think this is a very good Florida State team, and this is a game that Carolina will not be favored in and should not be favored in. I've got Florida State winning this one, and I've got a 0.15 likelihood of a win for Carolina. I think this is, if you look at these two rosters, I think Carolina's offensive line, I've been very clear about this when I scouted the guys that they have there. I think it's going to be an improvement in a lot of ways. I still have my concerns about pass rush at the tackle spots, but I think they should be better. But if you compare, for example, position by position, Florida State has 7 guys that would start over every player on North Carolina's offensive line. Might be 8. And I'm not sure that Carolina has more than one player on the defensive line who would be in the starting rotation or top 6 defensive linemen at Florida State. This is a line of scrimmage game, and I think that Florida State team is going to have a top 3 to 5 defense in the country. It's going to be very difficult to run on them, and there's not going to be a whole lot of room there. The one thing that I think gives Carolina a chance here, more than anything else, is that is a major trap spot for Florida State.
Yep.
So Florida State will be coming off of a road game at Miami, obviously a rivalry game. Miami's going to be, I think, very good this year roster-wise, and very well could beat Florida State. And either way, I think that that's a rivalry game that's going to be a war coming off of that, and then coming into this game, and then that's followed by a road trip to Notre Dame. So you talk about a sandwich game that is in an absolute trap spot. If you're going to catch Florida State on their schedule this year, that's the spot to do it. I just don't like the matchup.
I agree with about everything you said. And to somebody's point, Calandria didn't even play against Carolina last year. It just seemed like they had all-world quarterback. Calandria played for Virginia later in the season. Either way, it's Virginia and Carolina. And we're on FSU now. Greg, who you got?
Yeah, they didn't have all-world quarterback play. They just had a guy that could find some creases and get a couple first downs. I agree with Jason, so I'm going to use my time to say I think it's fascinating and somewhat idiotic that Florida State's last 3 games are non-conference games. There's got to be a rarity that happens. Notre Dame, Charleston Southern, and Florida. You just don't see that. So that's all I got. Carolina is going to lose this one.
It's better than when it's going to be Texas Tech, West Virginia, and UCF in the Big 12. Anyway, shot at you, Jason. Buck, who you got? Carolina, Florida State.
I'm picking Florida State in this game, and that's all I've got to say about it.
Taylor.
I would be surprised if Carolina could keep this within one score against Florida State. I just think Florida State a lot better in the trenches. I think they're returning 4 of their offensive linemen.
So they're returning 3 starters and then a 4th one who was the starter the year before but missed almost all of last year. And then they had problems at offensive guard at both guards last year, and they brought in 2 transfers, one who was a starter in the SEC and another who was in line to potentially be a starter at Alabama this year. So he was going to compete for a job there and probably would have been a backup, but they've shored up those 2 spots, and they've got additional guys coming back from injuries. So they're very good and pretty deep on the offensive line this year.
Yeah, I would love to see a stat comparing Carolina's returning stats along the offensive line and Florida State's, because I would have to imagine it's not even close. With, I think, 95% of Carolina's returning snaps on the offensive line is Willie Lampkin.
Yeah, Florida State has 190 returning starts on the offensive line, 96 returning starts on the defensive line, 99 at defensive back, and 69 in their offensive backfield. That's a very, very experienced football team. And I think 22 of their top 28 players, if I remember right, 22 of their top 28 players are on their depth chart are 4th year or older players. So that's one of those, it's a Florida State team with, the kind of starts and experience that you've seen like at Wake Forest in recent years. So you got a bunch of grown men on that team.
And that closes the Florida State portion of the program. Maybe they'll make the playoff this year. Is it too soon, Jason? Loss. I do think injuries could play a factor in this game, but
it's late enough in the year.
But they won't, because of what you talked about with the depth on Florida State's offensive and defensive line. So Florida State game is a loss. John B's already put it a loss. The IC community has it a loss at a 4% chance to win. We're going to circle back to the beginning for the last 3 games of the season. We're going to speed this up a little bit. Buck, you can start us off. Wake Forest at North Carolina. No Sam Hartman. It'll look very different, or will it?
Probably so, but it's going to be that mesh concept anyway. We'll see how all that goes, but the metrics favor North Carolina by a lot here. They're like 2 touchdown favorite by the S&P Plus, and the ESPN FBI like some 72.9%. So got them at home. I'm going to go with North Carolina against Wake.
Jason, Wake and Carolina.
I'm going with Carolina. I think this Wake team still just doesn't have a ton of talent on it. And, if you look again, if you made the comparison of roster to roster like I just did with Florida State and North Carolina, if you did the same thing and offered Wake Forest to trade trenches and all of that, Wake Forest would probably gladly do that, especially on the defensive side. I'm still not sold that Wake Forest, that Bachmeier is going to be, a major answer to win or as at the quarterback position for them. And I think in order for Wake Forest to beat Carolina in this game, they're going to have quarterback kind of go out of his mind. And, it's possible, but I don't see it happening as likely. So I'm going to go with Carolina 0.75.
Taylor, Wake, Carolina.
Yeah, I think Carolina wins. A lot of the same reasons Jason has. I'm not crazy about Wake Forest's skill group, and they kind of feel like a team in transition, losing all that talent with Hartman still and A.T. Perry. There's just not a lot of guys that you look at and you say, I know what you are confidently. So this Wake team comes in with a lot of question marks.
Greg.
I think until Dave Clawson figures out what he can do with the transfer portal, this is going to be a program back to kind of what we know it as, not being that good. And they lost 25 kids to the portal last year. And their whole concept of bringing kids in, who are raw and have potential, and coaching them up and relying on them as 4th and 5th year guys, the current setup does not work in that fashion. And so until he shows that he can figure that out, they're going to struggle. And so I've got North Carolina winning this one, even though they do have some veteran pieces back.
Daggone it. So these last three have caused me some consternation, including the last one and this one. But Greg Barnes just swayed my vote to Carolina win against Wake Forest. I freely admit, and I've referenced the video game multiple times, I can't beat them SOBs on that video game. I can't stand playing Wake Forest. John B., what you got? Your
slow
pick,
mesh getting you.
and then the computer. I hate it, man. And slow mesh, no huddle is unstoppable. John B.
I'm going with a win here as well. I think just total talent on the roster. UNC beats Wake for that reason. So this now becomes a question for Buck, for Taylor, for Tommy, and myself. We all have UNC at what, 8-2 at this point in the season. So at this point in the season, is UNC in the playoff conversation? Are they ranked 22nd in the AP poll? And people are starting to talk about UNC entering the playoff conversation. It's just interesting to talk about that because this is the first year of the expanded playoff, and that really will change how we think about the month of November in college football.
I do not think so, simply because of what's transpired over the last 3 or 4 years, and Greg has highlighted the drop-off at the end of the season. I think the voters will be waiting for Carolina's bubble to burst. And once it does against Virginia or Florida State or whatever, then they'll anchor them. So that's my take on it. Greg and Buck may have a different one, but that's how I feel.
I think that's fair. And I think Carolina's schedule is such that, they can't slip up and lose some of these games if they want to be in contention at the end of the year. The SEC and Big Ten teams, they can have a bad loss here or there because the rest of their schedule is going to be seen as very good. If Carolina loses really to any of these teams, well, FSU doesn't count, but everybody else, that's going to be a serious knock. So they have to be almost perfect to be in that conversation, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
I kind of think they could be in the conversation if they went 11-1, but 10-2 with this schedule is not going to cut it. I don't believe.
I agree, and it shouldn't. That's
It
why I
shouldn't.
don't. That's why I do
It
not
shouldn't.
like the 12-team
right.
playoff.
I think a lot of it's going to come down to if the scenarios play out as everybody kind of has it, what that loss to Florida State looks like in the minds of the committee. If Carolina's not even competitive, I think they're going to get pushed aside with the weak schedule narrative. But if they're in it and they do make it a game, then there's talk with if you can finish strong the last 2 games and kind of play yourself back into the conversation.
Yeah, it's also, I think if let's say they lost close in the opening week to Minnesota and then lost by 10 at Florida State and then won the rest, I think that 10-win team is in consideration, especially since that 10-win team would be 1 loss in the ACC and might be playing in the ACC title game. I think even if they didn't, even if they got they lost the tiebreakers and were 10-2 with that week 1 loss, which teams so many people tend to kind of overlook, like, oh well, that was week 1. That happens a lot. You lose, respectably in Tallahassee, and I think a win against NC State late that last week would mean a lot in the eyes of the voters. Even if NC State's 3-4 loss team, there's that's that rivalry week thing. How you finish the season is going to say a lot about where you're going to be in a lot of that, even with the schedule strength stuff.
I agree with all that. We will get there at Boston College. Let's go back to front. That means Greg Barnes, you're up. Boston College in November. Not a huge fan of the it's cold in November at BC narrative. But then again, I don't have to go play in it. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, and it could be, if you have bad weather, it could get miserable, but it could also be relatively nice, like good football weather. So that, I don't think that's going to be that big of an issue. I think this is an interesting game. I don't think BC's really gotten enough credit, or maybe credit's not the right word. Maybe interest is probably the better word this offseason. I mean, their schedule wasn't great last year, but what they go 7-6, and they return a ton of guys, including a lot of guys on the offense and their entire starting defensive line. And of course, got Bill O'Brien coming in. He did a good thing at Penn State, and he's full of himself. But maybe that'll work in the Northeast. So I think BC has potential to be solid. And then when you're talking about Carolina having to go on the road against a team that should be bowl eligible, it's going to be a tough game. I do have Carolina winning this game. I think by that point in the season, the quarterback situation will be solidified. And this will be an important win after a tough loss at Florida State, and probably a competitive game against Wake. But I think this is going to be one of the better wins for North Carolina at the end of the year.
Taylor, what you got?
Yeah, I like Boston College's quarterback, Thomas Castellanos. I think it's generous to call him a dual threat quarterback when he's not much of a thrower. 15 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. But what he does bring to the game is he's one of the best running threats at the quarterback position. Only Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner last year from LSU, had more rushing yards than Castellanos. And the running quarterback has kind of been the boogeyman for a lot of Carolina defenses. And going off of a comment I just saw in the chat, Jim Woodall, I don't think this North Carolina team is a college football playoff contender. And right now, with the wins-loss that I have, they would be a contender. And I think this is a loss where they kind of eliminate themselves from that talk.
I like it. I like the points made. Jason, you're up.
He just took almost all of my points. I've got this as a loss as well. It's 0.55 for me as a win. Again, I'm looking for losses at this point in the year to some degree based on what I think this team actually is. But I think this BC team is a dangerous team in certain respects because of the way that Castellanos just causes headaches for defenses. I do, if I'm a Boston College fan, I do have some concerns about Bill O'Brien trying to make Castellanos into a pocket passer and make him execute, more of a, pro type offense than what they got smart with him last year. And they basically ran single wing type stuff and formationed teams where, they would gain an extra gap by essentially having the running back be a lead blocker and different things to cause all sorts of problems. And he was a pain to defend. If they're willing to do that again, they've got 3 returning starters in the offensive line. They've got some vets there. They're going to be replacing both guards, but they've got some bodies to do that. So they're going to be big and they're going to be experienced on the offensive line. They return their entire defensive line. They've got they're adding a couple running back, or they've got a couple running backs. They got Robichaux, who was there last year, and then Trayshawn Ward, who's a transfer from Kansas State from Kansas State. He was at Florida State before that. Both quality backs. So, this is one where if you're looking for a loss, look into November and look for that road game. And this happens to be it. And it's a team that I think could be a bit of a problem.
Buck Sanders, you're up.
Well, I'm going to say this is a win for North Carolina, but I'm not immensely confident on it. I would give it a 50.5% Jason Staples estimate on the probability of a win. But, again, the ESPN, FBI, they favor North Carolina 56.7%, and right now the SP Plus favors them by a touchdown. We'll see. But, this is a game typically North Carolina is prone to lose, but I think they'll pull this. I'm not that big a fan of Bill O'Brien to start with. Their quarterback was like 128th in the FBS in terms of his PFF rating. So I'm going to go with North Carolina.
I've got Carolina overall at 9-3, and I refuse to pick the last one as one of those three, so I'm going to loss here. Trying not to go 10-2. People say I'm too optimistic, even though I think that's where we're trending. But yeah, I've got a loss at Boston College, just because that fits my narrative a little better. John.
I agree about everything that's been said about their quarterback. Rushed for over 1,100 yards last year, which is honestly just crazy. That's a great stat about Jaden Daniels as well, only having more rushing yards than him at the QB position. How about some love for Kamari Morales as well, an excellent tight end at North Carolina, who now goes up to Boston College and will be very productive and successful there. I'm going with a loss here for North Carolina. The IC community disagrees with the majority of the panel. 66% of respondents selected UNC to win this game. So we'll do the math on that. The IC community maybe has UNC at 9-2, maybe 8-3. We'll have to add these up in a little bit. Heading into the final game of the season, NC State at home. I believe it's on Black Friday after Thanksgiving. Tommy, who gets to lead off for this one?
Oh no, I think it's actually Saturday this year.
Oh, my bad.
And we're gonna go youngest to oldest, and it's perfect. So I'm starting with you, John. You start the North Carolina, not the IC community. Your pick for State Carolina.
This is by far for me the hardest one to pick. You look at what NC State has done with their offense, importing basically an entire skill position room, basically at every single position, running back, wide receiver, tight end. They really seem to like, I believe his name is Justin Jolly out of UConn. That's another weapon for them, in addition to Kevin Concepcion, who is just an excellent and very productive wide receiver. This is a tight one for me. If I'm doing the percentage thing that Jason likes to do, maybe it's a 0.51, but I have UNC winning this game to end this season. So I have UNC at 9-3 on the year.
Taylor, you're up.
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of it is the recency bias of what I've seen, but it does feel like NC State has kind of flipped the trend in this series, and being able to play the game more the style that they want to play, and kind of enforce their physicality on this North Carolina team that when you're watching them in the trenches last game in particular, it felt like that North Carolina team was kind of cowering and not really up for the moment in that game. And I like what NC State has offensively more than I like what Carolina has offensively. I think Concepcion's one of the best receivers in the country. I think this is a Grayson McCall spot where Carolina doesn't recruit him, and there was talks that he really wanted to come to Carolina. I think this is a game that he probably has circled on his calendar. And from what I've seen, this NC State team understands what this game means. This North Carolina team, the past couple of years, really hasn't matched that intensity. So until you kind of see where this rivalry was going when Mac Brown first came back, I would pick NC State.
Taylor laying it out. Jason Staples, I believe you are, according to the private chat, you are younger than Greg and I. You're up.
Oh, this is another coin flip game to me, and maybe the coin flippiest of them all. So interesting thing. I actually like NC State's offense. Weirdly, I mean, NC State was not good on offense last year, but I like the pieces that they've put together on offense a good bit. I mean, I thought Jordan Waters was the one returning back in the ACC that was, playing at a level, close to Omarion Hampton at times last year. And now he's no longer at Duke. He's at NC State. And he's a really good player. I mean, he's hard to stop at running back, and they're going to get a lot out of him. McCall, if he can stay healthy, over the course of the whole season, I think that's an issue that they need to, that may change things by this point in the season. But I think he fits a lot of what they're going to want to do well. And the couple transfer receivers that they added, Noah Rogers, Wesley Grimes, they got some players on offense that they've not had the last few years, and they've got some depth on the lines. So I like them more on offense, but I'm actually less bullish on their defense this year than I have been in a long time. So I think this game ends up being really, really close, down to the wire. I think Carolina's going to have every chance to win it, but ultimately I've got to go with the chalk in November, and in this game, I'm where Greg is on a lot of these things in terms of you said, Greg, you got to see it to believe it with the defense. Right now, I'm very much in see it to believe it with actually beating NC State at the end of the year. It's been a little while, and Carolina's had the better team, and has lost that game. 2 out of the last 3 years that they've had the better team and have lost. So at a certain point, I'm going to go with that, but I'm not confident in this pick at all. I'm going to go with a loss for Carolina, but 0.49.
Tommy, I also have a stat that I was looking up before I was going, and I just finished. In November or later, the past 3 seasons, North Carolina against Power 5 teams, 4-10.
That's the old Greg Barnes special right there. And it is you take out what, Campbell, Wofford, aren't they in there, built in there? It's not pretty. Greg, you're up.
Yeah, that's a good point for Taylor, and that's the key point for North Carolina this season. Is we've heard a lot about it this offseason of, hey, we've got to play more guys because they're getting worn down, and this will be the ultimate test. Look, I don't have a lot of good things to say for North Carolina here. State's won 12 of the last 17 games, 6 of the last 8. I think State this year, very much like Ole Miss, has kind of done what we'll see mid-level Power 5 teams do in the years to come, is that when they think they have an opportunity, they're going to spend a boatload of money in the portal and try to take their shot. It's not something they can do every single year, but I think they're going to try to do that this year. And if they happen to beat Tennessee and Charlotte, or even Clemson down in Clemson, State could be in the playoff conversation by the time this game rolls around. Their schedule's every bit as weak as North Carolina's. They just have 2 good teams in Tennessee and Clemson to start the year. I agree with pretty much everything else that's been said. I just don't see North Carolina being able to win this one. And let me throw this stat in there. This is strange. Carolina in Raleigh in this rivalry game has a 56.9% winning percentage. At Keenan, Carolina has a lower winning percentage at 56.0. So they've had more success in Raleigh against State than they have in Keenan. And that just speaks to a rivalry game, I guess. But I have NC State winning this one.
And I want to jump in and say one more thing as well. I'm seeing in the chat, some interesting, Slago, you're saying interesting seeing the prediction of a collapse down the stretch, given all the talk about correcting that with playing more players and all that. And that's true, but the other factor that I think we have to consider here is that this schedule is backloaded in terms of the quality of teams on this schedule. When you look at that first month, if they beat Minnesota, they should be 4-0. Right. And then, Duke is the best team in the first 5 that they play. And then you got a Pitt that's down and a GT that you should be. I mean, this schedule is really soft up front. But once you get to FSU, that FSU team is really good. That Boston College team on the road late in the year is going to be a tough out for anybody. And then NC State is the second best team on the schedule. So it's not. I actually think they're going to be better down the stretch than they have been. I think they are going to play more guys. But I also think that the schedule gets a lot tougher in that last month.
I agree. So that comes to me. Carolina's not. I will say this. If Carolina loses to NC State this season, it's going to be chaos in that small section of UNC's campus in which the football facilities are housed. 4 straight losses to that NC State team with the way those games have played, especially after the first 2 when Matt came back. Carolina bullied and wore out State 2 years in a row. You had Sam Howell pancaking people, linebackers or whoever. You had Javonte Williams running up and down Carter Finley Stadium like, some of the cows out there out next door. I mean, North Carolina was in the driver's seat in this rivalry. And for whatever reason, those 9 points in a minute and a half changed everything. 9 points down in a minute and a half. And I remember sitting in Carter Finley when they kicked the field goal and they celebrated like they had won the championship. I said, this game's not over. It is not over. And here we are, 3 losses in the rivalry later. When this one, Carolina can go 7-5 and beat NC State, I think Carolina fans would take that. But I have them going 9-3 and winning that game and getting this sort of back on track a little bit. And where it goes from there, we'll see. I've got Carolina beating State in Keenan. Who knows who even plays at this point? Jason, you mentioned health. Grayson McCall gets hurt. He's had issues. We've talked about the issues that Carolina's quarterbacks have had. Who even knows who suits up? But Carolina's going to win this game because they have to, period.
Yeah, what are the odds that both Grayson McCall and Max Johnson play in this game?
Oh, it's got to be a coin flip, if not lower than that.
A quarter.
Given their history, maybe 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's that. Buck, let you close out the regular season. North Carolina State comes to Keenan on Saturday after Thanksgiving.
Well, I really appreciate Tommy's. They're going to win. They're going to win this game because they have to. Theory of the case. But if I'm not going to go that route. I mean, I think this is probably the best NC State team that North Carolina has played in the Mac Brown era. And I know they have some issues on defense. I think they've got one really good guy coming back in the secondary, and the rest of those guys are pretty new, and they got to replace all the linebackers and all that. But I'm going to go with a loss to NC State because, why would I say anything different? This is the best. This is the best NC State team that they've faced. It's not the best UNC team, I don't believe, that has faced them. And North Carolina just has not shown the ability to beat NC State in recent years. So I'm going to go with State winning this one. Hate me if you want to hate me. That's just how it is.
But you cannot be hated ever. 9-3 for me, 8-4 for Greg Barnes, Taylor Vippolis 8-4, Jason Staples at 8-4. Buck joins me and also producer John at 9-3. The IC community. So when the IC community says we sunshine pump, well, look at the number on the right on this chart and tell me who's doing the pumping.
And by the way, they've got it 9-3 as a collective. That's interesting. Now, if you're talking about just raw pick and wins, they're at 10-2, but the actual percentages add up to 9-3, and that ultimately is what fans should expect. 9-3 or 8-4, and if it's 10-2, be thrilled.
Absolutely.
What did the IC community pick last year?
Oh, I think it was 11-1 or maybe 12-0. I can't remember.
I can pull it up here. I have the picks from.
I think it was 11-1, maybe 12-0.
Last year, the IC community picked 11-1.
Yeah.
With the only loss being at Clemson.
Yes, the percentages were different.
8.79 in percentages last year, though. So they predicted 9-3 in terms of by percentage, which is exactly, That's getting close there, guys.
So
Wisdom of the crowds.
we are all, if we're betting, we're all betting the over 7.5. Correct, gentlemen?
I would not put
Yeah.
any of my dollars on that.
So you wouldn't put your money where your
No.
mouth is, Taylor.
No, and I think not over like 90% of the outlook of this season for Carolina is going to come down to that NC State game.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. The taste that's left in the mouth, and that's why I don't like the state game at the end of the year. I prefer it during the state fair in October, because the taste of the season rests on that NC State game, even more so when it's the last game of the year. Let me just read a couple predictions from our esteemed Inside Carolina staff. I'm not going to go into the details. Scott Orr, 9-3. Joey Powell, 8-4. Buck Sanders had to correct Joey. That was a great thing. Sean Moran, 5-7.
That was so funny.
I know, really. That is
Joey Powell had us losing to Clemson.
But then he
Sorry, Joey,
then-
I didn't do it.
Then he tried to clean it up, and I busted
yeah.
him on that too.
Yeah. What was his cleanup? Like, oh, well, they'll find a way to lose to him even if they don't play him or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
they play him an ACC champion.
It was a nice try. I mean, and it was quick with it, but still a little lame.
Sherrell's taking the over. So we'll go 8 for Sherrell. Grant Hughes, 9-3. Sean Moran, 5-7. John Siegley, 6-6. John Siegley's always been the even keel guy, so 6-6 is not surprising. Rob Harrington, 8-4. Michelle, 8-4. Sherrell actually did the 9-3 and all that. So Adrian Atkinson, 8-4. Matt Clement, 7-5. Never did get a prediction from our beat writers because they have to be neutral. Evan Rogers, Inside Carolina intern, with a great detailed breakdown of his picks at 7-5. So a lot of fun stuff. Jeremy Rose asked a question that we'll address on December 1st in chat. We will see if that happens. Gentlemen, anything left as we officially start game week on Friday? Mac Brown available for the media, I believe, on Friday. Carolina, of course, plays on Thursday up in Minnesota. We will be doing the Game Plan podcast Tuesday night. Does that work for you guys? Greg and Jason, can we do Tuesday? So Tuesday night live at 9 o'clock and a bunch of other stuff. Anything left, Buck? I'll let you close us out of here.
Now, I think we've plucked all the feathers off this turkey, boys, as we like to say. I know Jason had that on his bingo card anyway. Yeah.
Hey, I didn't have you going with a percentage today. I'm wearing you down.
Well, you know, at least we got through an entire one of these shows without you changing your mind. Wait a second. I'm going to change.
Really.
Guilty.
Absolutely. It's always a fun show. We are almost an hour and a half in. I'm getting out of here. I see people walking out the back door. They're getting tired of hearing us talk. But shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. Shout out to Congruity. And remember, it's congruityhr.com. Check them out. And email Matt for a free assessment. It's always fun. Sean Crawley, the guys, the regulars, Scott Holland, when's the next IC show? Consistently dropping stuff. Greg and I will be talking to a beat writer on Wednesday, Ryan Burns. If you're on the message boards and you're not in that joint thread, I'll give Minnesota people some shouts out. They were cool last year in Keenan Stadium. They're going to be cool up there in Minnesota this year. Greg and I talked to him. Noon Dish live on Wednesday with Don Callahan and hopefully a special guest. A lot going on at Inside Carolina. Season's almost here. Thanks, everybody.